when the world has got you down. And
Alzheimer's sucks. It's an equal opportunity disease that chips away at everything we hold dear. And to date, there's no cure. So until there is, we continue to fight with the most powerful tool in our arsenal, love. This is Love Conquers Alls, a real and really positive podcast that takes a deep dive into everything Alzheimer's, the good, the bad, and everything in between. And now, here are your hosts, Susie Singer-Carter and me, Don Priest.
This is Susie Singer-Carter.
And I'm Don Priest, and this is Love Conquers Alls. Hello, Susan.
Hey, Donald. How you doing?
I'm great. I might be delayed a little bit, but other than that, I'm doing terrific.
We've had riches of hell this morning, right, between our technology and our poor guest that we love so dearly, who's like, I was so excited, and we'll talk about it, but she's had a cold, and she's not in her office, and it's all kinds of great things. But these are the kinds of, I think these are the kinds of things that bring happy surprises. This will be probably our best show.
They're challenges.
Ever.
Yeah, these
right?
are challenges that we're going to overcome.
Yeah.
And we're going to find the silver lining, if you will.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
So, if you listen to us, you know that it's always a good time. And we're glad that you guys are here because we have I'm just going to make it a quick short intro because we have a lot to talk about with our guest that you're going to introduce, Dawn, right?
Indeed. So why don't I do that?
To introduce, because it's, then we'll schmooze later.
Okay, that sounds good. Author, podcast host, award-winning blogger, contributor to numerous national newspapers and magazines, the UK's own Pippa Kelly has truly made a name for herself in the dementia and elder care universe. It was Pippa's own personal journey with her mother, who battled vascular dementia for 10 years, that shaped her creativity and launched her career. A prolific writer for the Huffington Post, The Guardian, and many others, she also shares her thoughts and experiences on her popular COVID-born podcast, Well I Know Now So Much More About Dementia, and has become one of the UK's top 10 dementia influencers. But Pippa Kelly's artistic proclivities know no bounds. Her debut novel, Invisible Ink, deftly draws upon her experiences with her mother to craft a fascinating, poetic, fictionalized tale that captures the intricacies of her mom's insidious disease. She is a force to be reckoned with in the literary and dementia space. And let's face it, we absolutely love her accent. So let's not wait another moment and say hello to the one, the only, Pippa Kelly. Hello, Pippa.
Hi, Don and Susie.
Greetings.
We did it.
We did. Here we are. We made
did
it.
Eventually. I'm still not at all happy with my backdrop, my lighting, my angles.
It's
my
glorious.
Well, you're a beautiful woman anyway, so it doesn't matter. And everyone should, as my mother would say, go look in the mirror and say, thank you. Thank you. That's it.
Can we just explain that we spent 10 minutes trying to set up and
Yeah. And she still has headroom, folks.
Still a lot of headroom. I know, I'm really upset. I'm so sorry because I know you don't want me to have headroom.
No, you're fine. You're so
You're good.
Pippa Kelly. First of all, everything about you is awesome. And I've said this before on my post. I was fortunate to be interviewed by you, and it was one of the best interviews I've ever had. You were so prepared, and well, first of all, you got everything. Like there wasn't anything you missed in my film, in my life, in everything. You were just so prepared and into everything. I was just so impressed with what you brought to that conversation.
I'm just nosy.
Well, the nosy is good. That's what makes you a good journalist then.
I said after I heard it that it was, and Susie's done a lot of these interviews, and I said that's the best. That's the best one I've heard. Because it was so personal, and it wasn't just question. You really were interested, and it really comes off that way.
I actually told my daughters. Yeah, I told my daughters, like, because they're like bored with ever listening to anything or watching whatever anything I've done. It's like, yeah. So I said to him, if you want to know your mother's legacy, this is the interview to listen to. And so, yeah, and they did, and they agreed. So thank you. Thank you.
Well, it was quite easy because you have a very interesting life, Susie. I mean,
well,
yeah.
Thank you, and as do you, and you know, so many similar things as we all share in dementia, the journey of dementia, right? And then also so diametrically different as it happens in these journeys as well. So, and I think that we all enjoy both. Well, we appreciate both of those, the similarities and the differences, because you know, it helps the journey. It helps the journey in the rearview mirror too, as with you, right?
Yeah. No, I was really surprised at how much, because the first piece I ever wrote, and it was the first and only ever time that I've used a pseudonym, because it was all just too raw, and my parents were both still alive, and my mother's dementia meant she couldn't, you know, she couldn't give me consent because she wouldn't have known what I was writing about. But that first piece, very high up in the piece, I did say I'm writing this so that other people in our situation know they're not alone. And I said that, but then I was really, really surprised with the responses that came back from that first article, which was a really long time ago now, because they were sort of saying thank you. And to begin with, I didn't know why they were saying thank you, but they were saying thank you for sharing it and for being so honest, because that just makes us feel validated. Also, I decided I had to be very, very honest about everything I said. So I talked about difficult things like the resentment I felt that my own life was being a bit sort of skewed out of its normal context, because I was having to look after both mum and dad as it happened at the same time. And you know, the people later, and even when I went on to do public speaking about it, that the overriding response was thank you, which I found so bizarre. And it just goes to show the power of sharing, of knowing you're not alone, of just sharing particularly difficult things, I think. Yeah, and I don't know quite why that is at a human level, but it obviously really offers comfort to people.
Oh, absolutely. Like, well, the showrunner, producer of Everyone Loves Raymond, Phil Rosenthal, I always quote this because he talks about, you know, the universality of is in the details.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right?
No, totally. Yeah.
And I think that's so true, because the same with our film, My Mom and the Girl, like I thought, you know, this was so, you know, my mother's idiosyncrasies were so unique to her, whatever. But, you know, as we discovered going on the festival circuit, we'd have teenagers come up with tears in their eyes and say, thank you, that was my grandma or my aunt or my mom. And you realize, like, even though, you know, we're Jewish and my mom was, you know, East Coast woman, and I thought, well, everybody seemed to resonate with her story that had been in a journey of this type. At some point, we too got so much grateful, you know, responses. Thank you for telling our story.
Yeah, it is the detail, isn't it? I mean, you're a storyteller, I'm a storyteller. I do sessions actually for our NHS over here about how to use stories to influence people, like all filmmakers, journalists, advertisers sort of do, without really thinking about it too much. But one of the ways you make a story compelling is to include those details, and people won't necessarily recognize that particular detail, but to be something about that detail that they'll say, that's just like when my mum, you know, did something else but in the same way. And it's through these sorry now, because I'm in the kitchen, my daughter's going off to play tennis in the rain, in the dark, as you do.
It's okay. It's a podcast, right? It's life. So, I mean, okay, so here's what I love about what you've done. So can we talk about, let's for people that don't know you, can we talk about a little bit about how you became, you know, this dementia campaigner, which I believe in American is an advocate, am I right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and a blogger and a podcaster and an author that, you know, really focusing on dementia. But before that, you were a writer anyway and a journalist, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what happened was, I think a couple of things came together really, because I My mum and my dad both became very ill, and my mum had dementia. My dad was his brain was fine, but physically a series of strokes just left him bedridden. And it's a slightly long story, but the story of how my mum got her dementia diagnosis is a really sort of shocking, traumatic one. I don't know if we probably didn't talk about it, did we? But I do have two older siblings, but they're much older than me, and they'd already left home, and I was about 13. And then Mum, Dad, and we moved into a house called Robin Wood. It was a very modest house, but my mum was from an incredibly humble background. She was a miner's daughter, and she gave up school at 12, and she worked in service, like, I don't know if you know Downton Abbey, but I mean, she worked below stairs as a maid, really. She went to work for an earl down in Surrey and met my dad at a wedding. They got married and they had 3 children. So that's just to set the context of how very poor she was. Then they move into this house called Robin Wood when I'm 13. And it is very modest, but it's detached. So she loved this house. She absolutely loved this house. I don't think she ever really kind of believed that she'd end up in a house like that. I can't tell you how modest it was, but it's just, the journey she travelled from where she'd been.
Right, from her perspective, yeah.
And then they both got ill and old, and they were sort of in their mid-70s, I suppose. Which back then, nowadays sort of younger, but it was Dad who got ill first because the whole family has a history of bad heart disease. And he started to have lots of episodes, lots of time in hospital. And everybody started to say, you've got to move from this house because, sort of enchanting as it is in its own way, with these gardens going down to the river, every shuffled step is up or down on 1 and 3 incline. You've got to move. And everybody was saying this. Even their doctor, who was a very sympathetic GP, we call him, a general practitioner, he wrote Mum a note and said, I've got, read this every night, Mrs. Kelly, he said. And it said, and I used to have the note, I must move for the sake of my husband's health. But she wouldn't. She just said, but I love this house. And I'm not moving became this kind of mantra for her. And she'd always been a very strong woman, despite being uneducated. She had this strong personality. And we thought she was just getting strong-willed, like she always was, more eccentric in her older age. And then Dad had to have a triple, it was meant to be triple, it ended up being a double heart bypass, aged 78. And we 3 siblings, grown ups, decided we'd have to just do something because we had to get them out of this house. Mum was implacable, she wasn't moving. So we came up with a plan, and it's going to sound really cruel. The plan was, I have power of attorney, which is when you have power over people's affairs legally. And so the plan was that I would sell Mum's and Dad's house, Robin Wood, without Mum's knowledge and without her consent, using my power of attorney. I'd sell it from under her, basically, which is a terrible, terrible thing. It remains actually the hardest thing I've ever sort of had to do. It was a really awful thing to do, but we had to do it. It took well over a year because it's very difficult to sell a house when one of the people living in it can't be allowed to know that it's up for sale. It's all quite funny in a black humour now with the distance of time. Obviously, it wasn't funny at all when we were trying to do that. So we finally sold the house, but then we had to try and work out how to sort of extract Mum physically from the house and get her into this flat that, again, I'd bought using power of attorney on behalf of Dad, which is a much more suitable flat, just in a building in the nearby town of Dorking. And then we had to come up, we had another sort of powwow family get-together, our siblings, and we decided that we would put in action another plan. And this one was that my sister would invite our parents to go and stay with her and her family for the weekend down in Somerset, in southwest England, something we knew Mum would be very happy to do. But the sting in the tail was when my sister brought our parents back up from this supposed weekend, she'd take our parents not to Robin Wood but to this new flat. And it was a really, really terrible weekend. On the Thursday morning, it was a May morning, it was grey, I got the call from my sister to say, I've picked up Mum and Dad, Pippa, and now the coast is clear for you to go down to Robin Wood to do what you have to do. And I got in the car, I drove down, and I'd moved into this house when I was 13. I moved out when I was 18 to go to university, but I've been back to it for over 30 years. And I turned my key in the lock, and the house was very warm still. And there was all the sort of detritus of life around me, and we were talking about details. My mum's coffee cup was still on the kitchen table because she thought she was coming back. And when I saw that coffee cup, it just killed me. I just stood in the entrance because you could see that kitchen from the door and really couldn't move. I felt so guilty. People talk about visceral feelings, don't they? And often that's completely not right. But I think in this occasion it probably was, because it was a very physical reaction to seeing this coffee cup. I just couldn't really move. I was polaxed with guilt. But then I had to do it. I had to sort of like shrug it off, switch off my emotions, get on. What I had to do was pack up this house that had been lived in by my parents for 36 years, and I had to pack it up in one day because the removal lorries were arriving the next morning very early, because that was the only way we had to do it while Mum wasn't there. So I didn't really pack it up, actually. I had to just go onto automatic pilot and just chuck everything, the contents of cupboards, wardrobes, drawers, into black bin bags, unlooked at, unopened. So later I realised that actually my mum's dementia, which was about to sort of unleash itself on us all, it robbed me not just of my mum, but of my chance to say goodbye to my childhood home. And at a very profound level, it robbed me of my chance to say goodbye to my childhood. And it came back to haunt me, that, and I had to have counselling about it later, because it was like I had to just throw away my childhood, almost literally. Anyway, my brother arrived from Ireland a bit later that afternoon. He lives in Ireland with his family, and so that was fantastic support, practically and morally. And then the Friday, the removal lorries came. Paul and I rushed around. We set up in this new flat what we could, and making it very kind of familiar for Mum. And the rest of the stuff that wouldn't fit into this flat, we just had to take it to the local dump. And then we set up the flat on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday morning my sister brought our parents back up from Somerset, and I've just rattled through that, so it won't come as a surprise to hear that when my sister, she approached Dorking, and my dad, who was by then himself quite frail, when they told Mum what we'd had to do, Mum had what you might call a sort of hysterical breakdown. She got really agitated, really upset, refused to get out of the car. My sister had to call out paramedics. All they could do was sedate Mum, and they did that. And poor old Mum, she just had one night of her life in this new flat that we'd gone to such great pains to try and move her into, because it was just awful. And it was apparent now, looking back, which is something you do an awful lot of with dementia, isn't it? Looking back anyway, it was obvious that things weren't right, but we honestly hadn't even spoken the word, hadn't kind of dawned on us that, because this is quite a long time ago, and dementia wasn't really even talked about then. And also what was obvious was that, again, this is obviously so common, and I feel stupid, as one does, that I didn't even know this at the time, but I didn't know anything about dementia. Her dementia had been covered up and sort of staved off because she'd been living in this very, very familiar surroundings of her house for 36 years. It also was apparent that Dad had been covering it up,
Right.
much more than we realised. But now, faced with this absolutely cataclysmic shock, this abrupt sort of rupture in her life, her dementia just unleashed itself. And it was quite obvious that we were dealing not with a difficult, recalcitrant, strong-minded woman, but with a very sick woman. So I phoned up the hospital, because she, by chance, she had this geriatric consultant's appointment sort of coming up fairly soon. And so I phoned up the hospital and I said, look, we're a family in crisis, and can I come in with her and see the consultant today? And the secretary said, yeah. And she in turn warned me that if Mum wouldn't be admitted to hospital voluntarily, which was obvious she needed to be for observation if nothing else, then they'd use the Mental Health Act to section her. I don't know what language you use over there, but that's when you're forced to do something against your will, really. And so Mum and I went into the hospital. And again, so common. First of all, we were walking towards the hospital from the car and getting towards the consultants' rooms, and Mum just seemed like rational, cogent, normal. She seemed to sort of uncannily know that something was going on that involved her. And this is, again, so common, and I was thinking, well, this is awful, because they're just going to look at me and think, why have you brought your mother into hospital? She's absolutely fine.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I knew she wasn't. She was sort of... but when, we got into the room and the consultant started to say, as we talked about it all, no, but your family's quite right, Mrs. Kelly. You absolutely need to come into hospital, and you absolutely need to sell this house, Robin Wood, and your family are only doing what's best for you. It's really not suitable for you anymore. Once he started to talk about Robin Wood, she just went back into her mantra and started to say, I'm not moving, and she got very agitated again and very upset. And then the consultant said, I'm stepping out then to fetch a colleague, and I knew that was his kind of signal. He was stepping out, and he'd come back and he was about to section my mum, which is obviously incredibly upsetting. I was very exhausted emotionally, physically, psychologically, every way. And at the thought of that, I burst into tears. And then it was very poignant because Mum saw that, and then she just snapped right back into being the old mum again, and she looked me in the eye and she said, well, I'll go into hospital then because I can't upset my baby. She called me her baby because I was by far the youngest of her children. And she went into hospital, and she stayed in hospital for 6 weeks, and then she was discharged straight into the first of 2 nursing homes, and she ended her life in a nursing home. Anyway, that was obviously incredibly traumatic and terrible. And a year after that weekend, I wrote what was to be the first personal piece. That was it. And as I say, I wrote it under a pseudonym because Mum and Dad were both still alive. And the response was just incredible. It was just incredible, because I suppose we were talking, about the details, and I suppose in a way I wrote it up, a bit like I've told you. It was I was given a long write, I was given 2,500 words, which is bliss for a journalist, and everybody just said, oh my God, that's us. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, thank you for sort of saying all that. And I talked about various emotions I felt, because that is us. Maybe not, obviously, as we're saying, not the same way. It's a unique story, isn't it? But it is also a universal story. It's a very individual story. Every dementia story is completely unique, but it's also universal. The guilt is a massive, massive part of any dementia sort of story, I think, always. And the not knowing, the ignorance, and I look back and I really try and analyse why we hadn't realised she had dementia, and maybe it was a stigma that we didn't want to realise it. I don't know. I honestly can't tell you.
Well, I think that what you're saying is, first of all, so poignant and so relatable, because, and I think hopefully that it's changing gradually now, the idea that we actually talk about it, and that there's actually education about dementia and Alzheimer's, and I think, because when my mom, the same thing, I had no idea what Alzheimer's was. And when my mom was first diagnosed, I was the one, because we were so close, and I said, something's wrong with Mom, and my brother, everyone was in denial.
Yeah.
But she's fine. Stop it. You're overreacting, and she's fine, and she's fine, and she's fine. But I knew my mom, and I knew, there was something wrong. And I finally got her in to get, assessed. And she had what they called mild cognitive impairment, right? But when I saw that she couldn't, and my mom was always so witty and sharp, and, so she could wit her way out at anything, like, well, who's the president? Well, you tell me, you tell me who it is, and wow, are you handsome, right? Just let's get him off the track. So, but, when she couldn't put the hands of the clock for 10:20 or whatever the question is, 10:40, and I saw my mom stutter, that my heart fell into my stomach, because I knew. So, but the truth is that what you went through is so diabolically horrific that you had to be put in that position to do all of that, which is just heartbreaking that you had to do that. It's heartbreaking that you had to sell everything that you just described, losing your own childhood and having to rush through that separation and embracing of that, which
And I often think about that because over here, and I'm sure it'll be the same in America, as is aware of these things, you often get little sort of slews of the same story in the newspapers. And for a while, there seemed to be, I pick up on it, I know, because I'm sensitive to it, but journalists of about my age or a bit younger would be writing about this terrible, terrible pain of having to sell up their parents' house. One of the parents has died, and then now they're having to move one, and they say, oh God, over the last year I've had these terrible weekends where I've had to go up to wherever it is, Birmingham or something, and it's been awful, and I sort through the belongings and I work out, and I just sit there thinking,
lucky you.
Lucky you.
Lucky you.
I know it's really tough and really emotional, but at least you had the chance to sit there and think, yeah, I remember that, and I remember we did that, and I'm going to keep that, I'm going to get rid of all that, but that I need to keep. So often I think, oh my God, and we did manage to squirrel out of the house one or two things when we knew this was coming up. But really, one or two things, it wasn't a lot. And it's really sad. I often think, oh my God, and then you think, no, I haven't got any of that, nothing of that. And it's just so sad.
Yeah, that on all that responsibility of having to navigate your mom's disease without really any help, because here you've got doctors, which really resonates for me, coming in and saying, well, they're going to step in, but they're going to step in with a solution that really isn't appropriate, which is to, put her into basically a psych ward, which is what happened to my mom for a second, right? Because they don't really have any other choice, because there isn't a lot of, I don't know, I'm guessing that it's the same in Britain, but, first of all, we have a great deficit of geriatric doctors here. They're not paid the same. No one wants to go into geriatrics, and those that are in geriatrics maybe haven't really focused on dementia and Alzheimer's, which is odd. Then you've got the whole other, population of doctors, of providers who really know nothing, zero about Alzheimer's. They can't even identify it. So it often gets confused with someone having a psychological breakdown. And, and that happened to my mom, where they locked her up for 7 days when I wasn't in town, because she was going to a doctor's office and she got agitated because she didn't know where she was. And they locked her up and plowed her with Depakote, and she never walked again after that. So, and these are the tragedies because of the lack of education and the lack of conversation about it. And if there was more of a community support in that sort of, in something that is so common.
That's really interesting, because from what you're saying, and it'd be great, we could have a whole conversation just around this aspect of it, the medical side, but from what you're saying, I think we have, it was so long ago now, things have definitely improved from that stage of what I've been describing with my mum, because that was, I'm trying to even think now, but that was 2007, 8. So in those, between then and now, things have really definitely improved. I do speak on my podcast through my journalism that I've spoken to we have some really, really exceptionally good geriatric doctors, and I'm sure you do in America. I know you're not saying that every one of them is bad, but I think now, and actually the ones I've spoken to about why they go into geriatric medicine, and I think this is becoming a little bit more of a thing over here. I think it's gaining traction that they realise that the older people are actually incredibly interesting, and of course they have all sorts of things going on, quite apart from the medical conditions, but they have so much wealth of experience, and geriatric consultants tend to be practitioners who are very, very interested in people, not just their symptoms and their conditions, So actually, I spoke to one, Dr. Lucy Pollock, who's just brilliant, and I've spoken to some other ones as well. I think and the education, and I believe that stigma, I have a sort of theory, I don't think it's my own, but I certainly subscribe to it, that stigma comes, it's a vicious circle, and stigma is bred when you get fear and silence, and then fear and silence, they build off each other. Because you fear it, you don't talk about it, because you don't talk about it, you fear it, and it just this toxic circle. And I think in the UK we're really beginning to break that circle. So, you know, so many soap operas and, you know, fictional accounts will have a dementia storyline. Some of our longest running soap operas on the radio and on the television will include one, and actually they research much better than they used to be. So it's not just, you know, I'm not even going to say the words of the images that we used to use, you know, and the language we used to use around it, but you know what I mean, that whole kind of stereotype. Now they're looking much more closely at, oh yes, you know, mild cognitive impairment, or, you know, or
nuance.
Nuance. And understanding it and showing things and showing people who might have Lewy body dementia, you know, and really beginning to sort of, you know, look into. So I don't know whether we might be ahead. So I think there's certainly, though, still some ignorance, and I'm often amazed, and other doctors even say to me that there is still some ignorance amongst the medical profession.
A lot.
Which does
There's
seem to
actually
be
quite a bit,
completely
yeah.
Yeah, I just was asked to do. I just contributed to the American Medical Association of Women Doctors for, you know, next month is Caregiver Appreciation, and, you know, talking about from a caregiver's perspective of someone with Alzheimer's, what I felt needed to change within that, the healthcare system and our doctors in particular. And, you know, they were really happy with it. I was really happy with what I delivered to them, because I had so much experience with that, and especially last year with my mom passing away, and the kind of ageism and ableism that is rampant in our healthcare system. And I know we're not alone in America. I know that ageism has permeated so many cultures that never even had it before.
Oh yeah.
So,
I mean, there's a lot of ages around. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you know, the value of someone's life at a certain age, and then you couple it with something like dementia, you know, and you have that effective ableism, and it becomes toxic, and it becomes, you know, it again. You know, when I hear your story as back when you were cleaning out Robin Wood, I think about me cleaning out my mother's life, the end of her life last year, trying to figure out and play whack-a-mole, right? And trying to figure out how do I really still haven't grieved her, because I was in such crisis mode and survival mode last year, which I shouldn't have had to been. I shouldn't have to. It was unnecessary, the stress that I was put under, and not to mention my mom. So, and that's, you know, why I'm doing the documentary that we're doing. But I mean, I feel like that it's still we're, you know, if there is change, it's on life support, because it's very tenuous, the change that has occurred.
Yeah, and I think the pandemic really threw that into stark relief, didn't it? And when you talk about the ageism, the way people after a certain age sort of begin to lose almost their currency, their value, you know, they're not valued as much as that was pretty sharp. And in fact, we're having, you know, various inquiries into the way it was handled over here, which you will be having in America, I'm sure. And one of the things that's very unsurprisingly coming out is the way the people in the care homes and the nursing homes were, I can't remember, I heard a horrible word used on the radio actually today. I can't remember what it's, but I remember sort of flinching as it was used, and it was really the way they were almost like, I hesitate in case I get it wrong, but a bit like guinea pigs as well, because it's like nobody knew, and in a sense nobody knew how to react. There was an unprecedented global pandemic. It was difficult, but it was really very sort of stark and obvious then that they became kind of breeding grounds for COVID. It was just extraordinary. It's just like, you know, they didn't have any testing kits, and then
but it really was emblematic of what goes on anyway, because, you know, this is where my head, we're living in this right now. But I mean, it really did expose the dirty little secrets that have been going on for decades and decades and decades, and will continue unless we make big changes, because, because of the fact that people are living longer, so there is we're a commodity. As we get older, we become a commodity that is useful to make money off of. But the humanity and the dignity have, died a lot.
And the other irony is that when you see the humanity and the dignity and the respect in action, it can be so moving and powerful. And this is why, I am a kind of glass half full person generally, but when I see things, and I suppose because of what I do, I tend to look out always the better stories. And even when I was doing more journalistic work nationally, I would try and find something good, because there are some fantastic organisations, charities. Sorry, that's now my dog. Don't know what he's doing, making horrible noises. They're doing wonderful, wonderful things that just make you feel you regain your confidence and all your love of the human spirit, humanity, when you see it, whether it be with, I'm a great believer in music and dementia. The power of music to connect with people, even when their dementia is very severe, is quite extraordinary.
Yes.
It's almost miraculous. And then over here, there are people using that, as an absolute plethora of music and dementia charities and not-for-profits and what have you, and it is just, and people just are passionate about it, and they give their time and their energy and their skills,
right,
often for very little or no money, and you see all that and you think, wow. And I always often say, I just observe it, I just talk about it, write about it, whatever. You do it.
Yeah.
You people every day do this, and that's quite, or you see a wonderful carer, and some people do. When you see somebody who's obviously got an innate quality to them, but then has been trained very carefully in good dementia care, that again is wonderful to see, when you see two humans connecting at that level.
Right.
One who's completely lost the power to verbalise what they want, but the other person who is skillful in interpreting that, to know and to go with that person. It's something very special.
Yeah.
And often people say to me, when I was doing more than I do now, but it must be so depressing, Pippa, just all the time writing and talking about dementia. I said, actually quite the reverse.
Yeah.
Where, for me, you get those, the story about my family, and it went on, being on and on and on, shocking, awful, terrible, and it does for a lot of people. But I suppose I made it my business to seek out really good practice, to try and just sort of say, right, can we replicate this? Why don't we do more of this? Because this is really helping people.
Right.
And often, A, it wasn't rocket science, and B, it wasn't always to do with money. It was actually more to do with understanding and education and sharing of knowledge and all that sort of thing. Of course, there was often money would be a part of it, but it's not just that. It's about a mindset, and it's about us as a society, changing, and the way we have changed, the way we say, talk. We didn't used to want to use the word cancer, which seems ridiculous now, but people say, I can remember my parents saying, "Oh, she's got the big C."
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There was a
so
show
knowing
like the
knowing
BBC,
that, knowing that now, knowing everything, when you look back, what would you have done? And there's certain things you couldn't have done differently, but what do you think you could have done or said or treated it differently to have maybe come out with a better outcome? Or is there anything you could have done under those circumstances?
Yes, I did, particularly with that story I've related about the sale of Robin Wood, about moving our parents out. Very difficult, isn't it, with hindsight, to know, but if there'd been more knowledge around dementia, and I don't know whether it was to do with stigma, but maybe if it had been a topic that was more known about, more talked about, we may have done. But then, Dad, it's difficult, isn't it? I think it's always difficult, and I hear this a lot from other people. You've got two people involved often at that stage, you've got a husband and wife, elderly. You got one of them who might or might not have dementia, and then you've got the other one. And the dynamics of that relationship are sort of bound together after so many years. And so Dad, I think he was in denial, because I think he knew that things weren't right, because he lived with her all the time, and it became then apparent, actually, as we sort of had to, as you, even in that hurried state, as you just dismantled Robin Wood, you could see, like at the back of cupboards and things, you could think, well, what, these are two people that actually always been incredibly clean and house proud, and what was going on at the back of those cupboards? And oh my God, what estate were they actually living in?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was, but you didn't know that, 'cause you didn't go poking around their cupboards because they seemed sort of okayish. And then, so Dad, bless him, Mum was the stronger. She was the least educated, of the two, but she had the strong personality. And could he have pushed more? Could we have known more and thought, well, actually, I don't know. Possibly, I think we would have maybe tackled it a bit earlier. But I still don't think we would have tackled it early enough, because looking back, we would have needed to tackle that whole situation like a good 2 years earlier, probably, or longer.
Right.
If you had knowledge of this, if you had knowledge of the disease, possibly you could have recognized some things earlier, and maybe, and also had it's hard. It takes a lot of bravery to attack it, tools and bravery to say, I'm going to confront this now. And do something about it.
It's the tools. It's that you do. Yeah, I think that like even with my mom, just the if I can relate, taking away her car keys, or those kinds of things where my mom was such an independent person. If I had better tools at the time, I was riffing it. I was improvising. I was trying to figure out, I didn't, now I very often related to raising my daughters because I became the mom of my mom. And so,
absolutely.
Right. And so I have to look at everything from her point of view, and how can I say this that will be the least, the path of least
provocative
resistance, and redirection, and positivity, because I am positive too. I don't, the fact that I'm living in the, No Country for Old People is a place I never thought I would be living in for a year, because I am Pollyanna. I've always looked for.
Yeah, you strike me that you are. Yeah.
And so,
if there's anything that's going to knock it out of you, though, it is our elderly care system, isn't it?
Right. But I realized that who better to tell the story than someone who has got sucker punched, and
exactly.
that I can say, because I want it to be good, and I have no grudge. It's not a grudge. It's just a fact. It's broken. Let's fix it.
And it could be so much better. I think
Right.
that's the other thing that can make you feel quite angry, because you think, well, actually, it could, be so much better. I totally agree with you on all that, and I think that I've learned so much, which is why, I decided to sort of call the podcast Well I Work Now, because that was a constant refrain. I know it's a Sylvia Plath quote, but I didn't know that until I started to sort of go around for a title. But people would just say, well, I wish I'd known then
Right.
what I know now.
Right.
Absolutely, because as I wrote, that was the first piece I wrote, to finish off your very first question to me, actually. That was the first piece I wrote. And then, as my parents both aged, one was more physical decline, and my mum's, of course, being dementia, was physical as well. People don't often even understand that. I think it's all about memory. It's not at all, is it? It's about physical and all sorts of things. But she was, she had her dementia, which gives it a whole other sphere to look at it through. I charted it all really in the national press, and so I began to get, personal, my family, dad and mum, and trying to get funding for both of them, and I wrote it all up, and so I began to get more known. So and then I began to win awards, and then I began to do public speaking, and then I did a blog, and then I did a podcast. So that's how I became a campaigner. But along the way of doing that, because I made dementia my subject, and I would talk to experts. Over here we have specialist dementia nurses, some extraordinary ones called Admiral nurses, and when I talked to them about pieces I was writing, they give you these tools. The nurses will go into a family's home, and they, you say, oh my goodness, because often people find that the straw that breaks the camel's back is it's personal hygiene, and it's, not to put too fine a point on it, it's incontinence and things like that. If the spouse has been looking after the older spouse with dementia, then it gets to a point where they just sort of physically cannot cope with all this stuff that's going on from the person with dementia. And the person with dementia won't go into the shower, and they do not want to be bathed or showered, and they start shouting and getting quite, agitated about it. And a dementia nurse with their training will come in and, just as you're saying, Susie, will say, well, there are ways to do this. There are ways to sort of, bring your mum with you to be in, make the shower a good place for her. And she, and when you see people like that in action, you just stand in awe and you think, wow, and they will get somebody to a shower quite easily.
Right.
And they will make somebody who's very upset actually quite contented.
Right.
In whatever way that might be, with the tools at their disposal, which I had no idea. I didn't even have the knowledge, or the common sense really to. I often wondered what I would do with my mum when I went to visit her in the care home, because I love my mum a lot and I wanted to go and see her, but then I thought, well, what do I do with her when I get there? Because I can't talk to her now. Mm-hmm. And then people would say, well, I used to go and do my mum's nails. Why didn't I think of that? And they'd, people would say, because this was a long time ago, so I didn't, I think now I might be more au fait with the fact that sensory things are very nice for people with dementia.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Or play music, or, like you said, music is,
I use
share
music.
That, just share
my mom
music.
my mom was a singer.
Music.
I sang for 2 hours at a time with her. That's what I would do.
Well, that's amazing, isn't it? And I now know how incredible. So the only, things I stumbled upon by chance, and I did write this up for another newspaper, because I said, have you got a nice Christmas story? And I said, well, I know you're going to think this is really mad, but I've got a really beautiful dementia Christmas story. They said, okay, what is it? And what it was that, I don't know whether this happened to you, Susie, but, in the last 2 to 3 years of my mum's life in the nursing home, she slept a lot. She also got infections sometimes, and there were so many times I thought she was about to die.
Yeah.
And then she didn't. And that's very difficult, isn't it? Emotionally, that's very difficult anyway. And then it was Christmas Eve, and I got this call again, and I'd got to know it so well, like, oh, your mum's got an infection. And we decided, she had her end-of-life plan, and it was all there, and my siblings and I had agreed it. Dad was a bit too far gone himself really then, but, and it was that she should never be in any pain or distress or discomfort, but it had got to the stage where we didn't want to overly prolong her life, because her quality of life had now really gone. And I think now you do eventually get to that point with anything. So she slept all the time. She was curled up like a fetus in her bed, and she was being fed. Well, she was tiny by then, but she was pureed food. So. And then sometimes I get a doctor who said, no, we've got to whisk her off to hospital, we've got to put her in a tube, we've got to do this, and we as a family would be saying, no, we don't want you to hoist her out of a bed and hoist her into it. It's not dignified, it's not respectful, but they would kind of like, well, if you don't, then you're starving her to death, and you'd get all that kind of moral, so you say, okay, because you defer to the experts, and then you think, oh, and then Mum rallied, she didn't, because she get back to the nursing home. So I got the call, and it was Christmas Eve, and I remember I was I was shopping, I was getting kind of stuff in the supermarket, and I got the call again, and I said, and I sort of said, I know exactly what we want in these situations, and he said, well, I think you ought to come down, and I said, fine. I did say to my husband, oh golly, I'm so busy, and luckily people around me said, no, go, doesn't matter how busy you are, it doesn't matter, because if this is the time, you've got to go, because you never know when it will be, and it would be so awful. So I did go down, and then on the way down I was thinking, oh my goodness. And here in the UK we have the 9 lessons and carols from King's College, Cambridge, every Christmas Eve. My mum absolutely loved it. I remember as a little girl making mince pies, listening to this. It was just there, and I thought, we can listen to that, because I don't have to. We can't converse, and we can just sit there and answer. So when I got there just about 5 minutes to 3. It starts at 3 o'clock on Christmas. They put the radio on. And it always starts with Once in Royal David City. And it's a lone chorister. And it started. And as it started, she was lying in her bed. And she opened her eyes. I mean, that's it. It's nothing, there's no great singing and whistling bells, but at that point, for her to open her eyes on cue like that, as this music was I sort of sat up and I said, Mum, can you hear it? And it was a real connection. And then she just kept them open and she just looked at the ceiling, and we listened to the 9 lessons and carols, and I drove back home, and she died the next day.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got the call, because it was Christmas Day, of course I drove down, but I arrived like 5 minutes too late, and it was Christmas. It wasn't even her normal, staff, because it was shift staff, because it was Christmas. And so this carer sort of passed me in the corridor, and I said, I was kind of running, and she said, she's gone. Mm. So it was an enormous comfort to me that I'd had this time with Mum. And of course, I later went on through my writing and work to discover that that was the best thing I could possibly have done. Because for my mum, the 9 lessons and carols, something she'd listened to since she was a girl, and she died at 90, it's like part of her DNA.
Right.
That music, those notes, she would have got that.
Yeah.
That would have connected.
Right.
And I'm sure they've done now, neurologically proved as to why music has this incredible effect. It would have got those last remaining little kind of neurons, and they would have jumped and sparked, and she would have. So I'm so happy. But that was just the complete happy chance, really, that I did that. And she died on Christmas Day,
Right.
So but if I'd known, of course, I would have listened to far more music with her. And I would have made sure we had like a playlist for her of all the songs that she really loved. Mm-hmm. She loved Dean Martin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Right.
I would have played. She loved American Pie and Don McLean. Simon and Garfunkel. I knew exactly what would be on her playlist.
Right. Right.
But I didn't do one for her because I didn't realize.
Yeah,
Right.
that's where the knowledge and the education comes in. What you're doing
Right.
now,
Right.
and what we're hopefully
Right.
doing is to let people know these are and they're simple. They're so easy to do,
My
and they
point,
make such a
rocket
huge
science
difference.
is simple.
Yeah.
It makes all the difference.
Yeah. No, it's. I mean, I lucked into the music because that was our language anyway. So my whole life, music was our language, and so I knew that I saw the magic, and then of course it was validated with Alive Inside, the documentary, and I was like, right, and all those, and you think like, well, yeah, of course it's magic, and I mean my whole family was musical, and so I knew the power of music, and I just lucked into that, but. There's so many mistakes I made. I was going to talk my mom out of Alzheimer's, and I tried for years to talk her out of it.
I love the idea. I love that idea of you just talking out of it. Hey, come on now, come on.
Remember,
Education.
Remember
Education.
I told you have Alzheimer's, Mom. What do you have?
Give him a slap round the face. Yeah. No, I love the idea that you could just,
It's like Cher. Snap out of it. Just snap out of it.
Wouldn't that be good though if we could just use that and
Yeah, but and then you finally realize, I get it. I'm not that great. I can't do that. I can't fix this. I cannot fix this.
Yeah.
I can't.
And when they
fix
get
it.
moments of lucidity, it's also you say, oh wait, I see. You see them for a moment, and you think I can get in, but it doesn't stay, unfortunately.
I think
and that's
the moments of lucidity are some of the hardest moments. I don't know about you, Susie.
because you realize what you're missing.
Don, do you have any?
Well, my dad.
Don has any experience.
My dad
with loved ones?
my dad had dementia, but it was not. They actually had on his death certificate Alzheimer's, but he did not have Alzheimer's, and
he didn't have
towards the end it
Alzheimer's.
was hard to communicate, but he had difficulty communicating, and then my mom, who's still with us, thank God, she has Parkinson's, but her mind is amazing. Her memory is amazing. She always thinks, because she can't remember
Memory's
like she used to,
extraordinary.
or she loses words. And I said, Mom.
Yeah.
I lose words all the time.
Yeah.
But her
Join
memory.
the club,
So,
Yeah.
but I was also there with Susie, along the journey that she took, because I was very close with Norma, and so I'm quite familiar with all the ins and outs, and it's quite different
I
when
think
you're,
it's very typical.
yeah.
I think they're the gifts, though, Pippa. I think they are the gifts too. Like in my movie, when my mom, becomes lucid in the hallway at 4 a.m. and takes a look at me and goes, "You got to put me in a home. You got to live your life."
Yeah.
And those are the gifts, and then like mommy, like you said, when you started to cry, and your mom was like, "Mommy," and mommy came out, and I tell
Absolutely.
this story about my mom when my stepdad, who very similar to your story, my stepdad was very, his mind was great, but his body was breaking down, so he couldn't hear, he couldn't see good, he couldn't walk good. So that together they made almost a whole person, because he was her memory, right? But he was in the hospital, and my husband, who at the time we were breaking up, and he was very clumsy about my mom's disease. He had no patience for it at all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he was, an actor and didn't really care, and there was a moment that he bound in and he was bounding out, and he made this incredible tumult. And then I was sitting on the stairs in my house, because we were moving. I was going to move my mom with me as I moved. And I started to cry, and my mom became mommy.
Yeah.
And she said, I said before, I said, I want you to go I told you he was never good enough for you. I want you to go in the bathroom and wipe your face, look in the mirror, and thank God for your brain in that face, and pull your shit together, right? And so I went in, got a tissue, came back out, and there my mom was, and she goes, "Oh, you're crying. What happened?" And so there, but I had her for a second. And, a couple months before she died, and she wasn't talking at all because of all the hell that she'd been through. And Dawn was there, and out of nowhere, I was doing my dog and pony show, and, trying to make her laugh and trying to keep her entertained. And out of nowhere, I was looking over here, and she just went, "I love you." Just like she ever did.
Yeah.
And that was such a gift. And I freaked out, because I was like, "Mom, that was so hard for you. That was so hard," but she had to get it out. So
And those were her last
words
words to you too. Yeah, those were her last
that
words
point,
she ever said to you.
And so she needed to say that. So that is the gift that I hold on to. But it's really hard, because it's a tease. It's The Notebook in a way. The movie, The Notebook. And
The Notebook. I suppose, I don't know, I found it quite difficult when she only, that moment in the consultant's room, which was incredibly poignant. That was, and it was the last time ever, though. She never came back like that again, actually, because I think she was actually it was quite advanced, her dementia, really. Then she went to the nursing home, and the one thing that kind of, to talk about those when they come back, I think it must be so frightening for the person, though, when they flash back and they kind of know what's happening. That must be so frightening, because she went into this nursing home, the first one of the two nursing homes, and they said to me, "Don't visit just for," I can't remember what it was now, but they said, "Just let her settle in for a little bit and then come and visit, because she'll get very confused." So, okay. And I went along for the first time to visit her, and, so they'd move in May, so by the time I visited her, and she was in hospital for 6 weeks, it must have been about June, July. Anyway, it was a beautiful day. I remember that. It was a beautiful day, and we sat in the garden. It had a nice garden in this first nursing home, and we were sitting there, and then she suddenly said, very, like in a normal voice, she suddenly said, "I cried myself to sleep last night." I said, "Oh my God, Mum," and then, like you do, because you kind of go back into normal, I said, "Why did you do that? What was the matter?" And as it coming out my mouth, I was thinking, why did you say that? Because obviously it's because she's in a nursing home, and because she sold her house from under her. And I was thinking, oh no, why did I say that? And I was thinking, I'm going to get a whole, you're the terrible, terrible daughter and that. But she didn't, because she was obviously really with it. And she just sat there in the garden and said, I can't remember my life.
Oh,
And if you think about that,
that's so
I was just listening to something else on the radio, and I can't remember, it was actually it might have been a songwriter, but it was somebody, or an author, I think, a novelist, saying actually, memory is everything. And it is, really. If you can't remember your life, then what was it all about? Who are you? That's why it strikes your identity, doesn't it?
It does, but and then again, can I just give you a different perspective that I learned from Judy Cornish, who has an incredible program, and I think that, we put a lot of currency on memory, and yes, it's wonderful and it's great, but it's also incredible that people with dementia, until it gets, for the most of that journey, they really become like the most mindful Zen place you can ever be, because they're living in the moment.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. That's one of the really, really sort of silver linings. And so many people with dementia have said that to me, in particular Wendy Mitchell, who I'm sure you've heard of, this best-selling author. And she said, but, I now... You have to live in the moment. You have nowhere else to live.
Right, but so it's a forced almost, a state of a monk, which in all philosophies is the greatest place to be, right?
Exactly. So that's right. No, somebody else put it like that. They said, we found the answer. We are there. We are
here. We are here, and that's what's so beautiful about it, because we do put currency on memories so much that it overrides the value of the living now.
Absolutely, and particularly in this day and age when well, I hesitate to say, but I'm certainly of an age where I just sort of look at so many people with their mobile phones out, and I think, why don't you just look at that scene? Rather than filming it all the time.
Instead of taking a picture of it,
Why don't you see it now? Why don't you actually enjoy the smells and everything that go with it now, in the moment?
And if you really want to put a positive spin on it, Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is our friend, the delay. No, I was just going to say, if you really want to put a positive spin on it, everything's new to them, moment by moment. Everything is a new discovery. If you can look at it that way, say maybe there's something nice about that. That as we get older, everything becomes. I've known that. I've seen it. I've done that. Nothing's exciting anymore. So maybe if we can put that spin on it, I don't know if that.
My mother.
I think that's why intergenerational stuff works so well. I think because, and I don't wish to infantilize older people or people with dementia, but I think there is great connections between young people and very much older people.
Yeah.
And then
100%.
And it's partly because the young child sees Granny put the skirt on back to front or put something on their head. My mum always used to put tea cozies on her head. You probably don't even have tea cozies in America, but you cover your teapot with a tea cozy. My mum used to think it was hilarious to put it on her head. That was way before she had dementia. She just thought it was funny. It was quite funny. But the child will just think that that's funny, and they will copy it, and in fact, they're doing what the best dementia carer will do. They just validate the behavior,
Exactly. Well, I also draw a lot of comparisons between children, and I'm not infantilizing either, but it is the state of the brain, of the mind, of where they're at that moment, and the filters go away, and the social construct goes away. And if my mom would see somebody with a big rear end, and she'd go, "Wow, that's a big rear end," and I'd go, "Well, Mom, have you looked at yours?" And she goes, "I'm just saying," and it's just saying. And the truth is, and I remember one woman, I was so embarrassed, she goes, "Well, she's right." About her. And I think it's because it's so honest. It's not, there's no
quite refreshing. It's quite refreshing.
It's refreshing. Actually. So when I remember the woman going, "Well, she's right, I do."
It's not coming from a negative space. Yeah.
It wasn't it was no negativity.
No, there was no malice. It was just the truth. It was just the truth as she saw it. I was at a thing where there's this wonderful, I don't know what's happened to them, but there was a sort of charity, or a very small one, but they did opera, jukebox opera, and they got she had some connections, this woman, so she got world-class opera singers, They then wrote these little sort of 10-minute operas with all the best parts of various operas. And these were seriously good opera singers who had, sung Covent Garden and places. And I was talking to one of the opera singers after I went to one of the things. They would go into care homes with people with dementia and perform these things. And I don't know how long it lasted because, that would be a money thing. But anyway, and the opera singer said, do you know what? I very nearly didn't do this at all because I just thought, do you know what? I don't really go and sing in care homes. I sing at the Royal Opera House. I sing at the Scala Milan. And they said, but do you know what? It's been the most rewarding thing I've ever done. And I said, why is that? And she said, because when you sing anywhere, anywhere, it doesn't have to be the Royal Opera House, but you're on the stage and your audience are kind of like, they're trapped, aren't they? They're trapped in the auditorium, especially if you're in the middle row. These people in care homes, she said, if they didn't like what I was singing, boy, did I know it. They just shouting out, that's rubbish. And she said, and I really had to get, obviously it's a different scenario. She said, I really had to keep eye contact. I really had to sing to, I would sort of see the ones that were going to be causing a little bit of trouble, and I'd have to really pinion them with the eye contact and sing to them as if I was, this was like just me and them in the room. And she said, and actually it was incredibly good for me to do it. And I learned more, and it was more rewarding. And when you saw somebody just break into a smile,
it was real.
And I had a world-class opera singer on my, and you just do, and but the reactions as well, to bring somebody from a state where they are just sitting there with their head down, all the connections have gone, really, the human connections. They're in their own world with their dementia, and they look very depressed, and they're just sitting there, and nothing seems to be going on. And then, like the Alive Inside video, they started to hear us sing, and they would just start to look up, and then they would start to, start moving a bit to the music, and then, you just get this amazing connection.
No, it's beautiful. I loved it. I used to, I think that the culture change of, like, when I would first started visiting my mom when she was getting more advanced, and the culture of those nursing homes, that it can be overwhelming because we're not exposed to it, right? And then when you lean in, and I became, as I think we talked about on your podcast, I had my best friends, my
you had your admirers, I know.
Yeah. It was like incredible, and I would like go there, and I would feel like $1 million because I'd walk in with my daughters, and they well, first of all, oh, are you here to visit your grandmother? Yes, I am. Yes, I am. And and I say that if you ever feel bad about yourself, go into a nursing home and you will feel like $1 million. And I was the best singer. I would start singing, and I forget about it. Like Lady Gaga, move over because I'm here now. And I was like a rock star there, right? And I mean, you can't. And it's just a different culture, and it's not about disrespect, because I ended up like getting to know these people so well and loving them, and really looking forward to going and visiting and meet and chatting to the friends.
You made such a good point. I can't remember how you just phrased it, but it was such a good point about leaning into the, we all have. I mean, I certainly did. I had the same feeling towards hospices, and then I had to write a piece on hospices, and I suddenly realised, why have I been so sort of frightened of them? But certainly in nursing homes, you often over here, they are literally out of sight, out of mind. They're often not actually in the village or the town or wherever, they're on the outskirts. I mean, both my mums were. And then they're often, not metaphorically, but literally behind a tall hedge. So you can't see them. And they're apart, and they're a bit frightening, and they're somewhere you don't want to go. And then, as with everything, once it's your mum, Susie, or my mum, that happened to me with my mum's dementia as well, because I admit to this, I would sort of metaphorically cross the street if somebody was doing something strange and talking to themselves loudly or something, because I think, now I think to myself, actually, that they've probably got dementia or something, and I will try and, help, or, I certainly won't sort of, metaphorically cross the street and look the other way. But once it's your mum, if anybody kind of was sniffy when we took my mum to a restaurant, she did something odd, you'd be like this kind of, lioness, wouldn't you? You kind of roar up and say, "Are you looking at my mum strangely?" Because, so you feel that, and once they're in the nursing home and you go to the nursing home, it's their home, isn't it?
It is.
And then you're visiting your mum in her home, and so, it just changes your whole perception of it. And if only we could, and over here now, it doesn't seem to be sort of like that, doesn't seem to be making much progress, but there's a bit of a push to try and integrate care homes far more into communities. So they use them, and children, well, certainly that's happening. So school children will go in, and other people will go in, not just tokenistically, but really start to integrate.
Right. No, it needs to happen. It needs to happen, because if we're going to live longer, if we're going to create, opportunities to extend our lives, but to what end? Then we truly are just warehousing people for the dollar, and that's the gross part of it. So and we certainly can do that, and it's certainly been happening under our own noses. So there's an uptick in that, and keeping people alive far longer than they should, and then not caring for them in a quality way, and so they're not having a quality life. And so that's where the education comes in. That's where, and I mean all education, for the public, for our providers, everybody. So one last question, and then we'll go. Do you think that you will stay in the care advocacy as a care campaigner always? Do you think, for the rest of your life, or you see it?
I will always advocate for it. Whether I will do it in such a sort of prolific, high-profile way is another matter.
Right.
Because hopefully in about a year, my husband will have a little bit more time on his hands. Hopefully, although it won't be a lot, because he's never really gonna, he's one of those people who's never really gonna kind of retire. But and so he says to me, it would be quite nice to have a bit more time together. So I think I have to sort of think of the work-life balance, and maybe just, although I must admit that's a ridiculous thing to say, because I already have a really nice work-life balance, but to give my husband more time, to be honest. So I think, but it is interesting, because I was trying to actually do fewer podcasts, and then as soon as you think that, I've had sort of things have happened, and it's like, I've got to do a podcast about that, or somebody approaches you. It's quite a difficult thing, isn't it, to walk away from. And I will always do it in my own way, even if it's not in quite such a structured way.
Right.
I will always go yabbering on about it, and trying to, I don't really like to use the word educate, because who am I to educate people, but trying to just
enlighten.
Keep the conversation going.
Talk. To keep the conversation going is a very nice way of putting it. And just talk.
I think that's important, that we know, you don't know until you know. And when you know, that's when you can share it. And that's all we can do once we've learned, is that we share it.
You don't know until you know. I mean, when I wrote that first piece, I phoned up some care, expert to give me a quote, because it was, at the end, as you have to do, a sort of fact box thing for this piece. And she sensed the guilt in me, and she said, but you don't know what you don't know.
That's right. The only guilt you should have is when you do know, and then you do nothing. Right? And that's the problem. That's the only time. So once you know, and that's, and that goes back to me doing the documentary. It's like, I knew, now I know, I know, and I can't not talk about it, because then I'm doing, I'm falling
You're
into
complicit at that point.
trap. I'm complicit. So that's why, and but I keep saying, once I'm done with this, then I need to I just need to
Yeah.
to just relax
Yeah.
for a second
Yeah.
because it's a lot.
Yeah.
It is a lot, but
Yeah.
I do like keeping the conversation going this way. This is a great outlet for me.
Yeah, also, I suppose, I mean, offshoots have come my way as a result of that. And therefore, and I am a great believer in this, I'm a great believer in using humour where you can, which I think you do too, Susie, don't you? Arts and humour and creativity is fantastic because it's a kind of softer but often more powerful way to get a message across, I think. Which is why I thought your film was totally brilliant.
Thank you.
And so there's that, and also, I suppose that's what you'd call the soft power of culture and of these softer forms of doing it, really. And so we were talking about stories and stuff, and I do other sessions that are really to do with storytelling and showing people how to use a story. But along the way of doing that, I often use the dementia story because it's a very powerful one. So, and then actually what we find, and this is meant to be for senior managers, and it's in a kind of workspace situation about bringing people with you when you make big decisions about merging of two hospitals or whatever it might be. But actually we get a bit stuck on the dementia because once you get into stories about dementia, everybody has got a story and they want to tell you about it, and so we end up sometimes having almost like therapeutic sessions.
Yeah.
And we have to be careful that, that's absolutely brilliant. And also people find it's a very safe space to be able to, because there are other people sharing it, to go right back to the beginning of our conversation. This sharing is so important because people can then feel safe to express their emotions around things and say, well, actually, I really, really love my dad, but I've also got a husband, a family, a job, a this, a that, and they can vent a bit in a safe space.
And it creates community and it creates human interaction, which is something in today's world we have so little of. Everything is done, by typing or just by punching out words. So to actually have physical or just communication person to person, it's refreshing, and it's something I think we need as human beings. So
can I show you my dog?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Hello.
You must. It's the law. You have to.
Wait.
There's
There's
hang
the
on.
dog.
No, you haven't
Now we're
seen
at the
him,
dog's
have you?
level.
He's gone.
No, we haven't seen him
the
yet.
dog was the dog
We
is
see
now
his point
gone.
of view.
There's
You must see him now.
Now we do. It's a
there's
golden
a-
retriever.
There we go.
Yes.
Oh my God, I love I have your golden retriever. I was just telling Don last night that I really miss having a golden
Oh
retriever.
no, I've switched you off now. I've managed to. Okay, keep talking.
No, we're
Okay,
back.
now where I see you.
No, you've
see
gone
you.
from me, but you're obviously still there. Okay. hang
Okay.
on. Yeah, I got you.
No, I love golden retrievers. They're amazing. They're like
His
they're
face is
just
here.
so beautiful.
They're caregivers.
I love them. They are caregivers.
Oh, they are. Yeah, we have. Oh, Reg, not playing. But we have therapy dogs. There
Oh,
he
no, looks just like my dog. Oh, so beautiful. No, they really are. I remember my cat had kittens, and the kittens would go all over her body, and she wouldn't move for fear that she would hurt them, and she would let them crawl, and she
They're
wouldn't
very-
get up.
Yeah,
So-
they're very gentle, aren't they? I must say, Reggie's spatial awareness is not great.
No, they don't have spatial awareness. Their tails hit everything. The tails are wild, but they are so beautiful. I love them. Well, thank you so much. I love this conversation. We could talk for, hours and hours.
time.
I hope that one day that next time I'm in the UK, I can come and see
Oh,
you.
you must
And-
come. You must
Yes.
come and definitely meet up in London or
Yeah,
wherever.
yeah. My daughter
that would
is
be
half British, so my ex was British, so
Well, if ever you're here, or you, Don, if ever you're here, you've got my number and my email and what
Yes.
have you.
Yes.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
Is there anything else that we missed that you wanted to get out to the world? Or we?
Oh, loads of things, but we didn't miss them, but there's loads I can talk about dementia forever. I mean,
yeah, we can. I know.
It's a big subject.
It's a big subject because I have all these questions and I'm like,
Yeah.
I didn't even get to number 5 yet. So, but it's okay. Another time, We'll do
Yeah.
it. We'll do it.
Yeah.
It gives us a good excuse to reconnect.
And
so.
and how is your? I mean, brilliant. It looks like you've completed your No Country for Old People. Have you?
Well, not really. We know we are. We
I
just.
saw some launch thing, and I thought, oh.
Oh no! No, that's a conference that I'm going to just for awareness at the National Consumer Voice next week, but where we're going to show a bit of it, just a tease of it. But we're still
okay.
raising money. We are in the throes of editing. We just passed the 2.5 hour mark, so which we're looking like we're going to end up doing a mini series probably about 4 episodes. It's just too big of a subject. So, but I'm thrilled with all the interviews that we got, and we're just very, very happy with it. It's just a beast of a project. It's humongous. It's the hardest project we've ever done.
And raising funds for it has been the hardest thing we've ever done. Just it's difficult.
I bet.
It is.
Yeah.
But
well done. I mean, well done. That's a massive thing. So Reggie's looking like he needs to go out.
Well, we shall end up.
We shall let him go.
And thank you so much. Thank you so much.